So this is the Nobel.
In 2002, he won the Nobel Peace Prize for his efforts at global diplomacy.
But that's what that kind of suggests.
But there may have been times when I was too outspoken in criticizing an incumbent president.
Jimmy Carter could have been worth billions. Instead, he died with $10 million and a house worth less than a typical Beverly Hills garage. Why? Because every time he made money, he gave it away. From fighting diseases in Africa to building homes for the poor, his generosity knew no bounds. Now, his last will reveals something so touching about where his money's going, it left his family in tears. This is the story of a president who chose service over riches and changed what it means to leave a legacy. Jimmy Carter was born on October 1st, 1924, in Plains, Georgia. Plains was a small farming town, and life there was simple. What made Jimmy's birth special was that he was the first U.S. president to be born in a hospital. He was born in the Wise Sanitarium, which later became important in his life again. When Jimmy's father, Earl Carter, got sick with cancer in 1953, he was treated at the same hospital. At that time, Jimmy left his career in the Navy to come back home and take care of the family farm. This moment changed Jimmy's life and brought him back to the place where it all started. Jimmy grew up during the Great Depression. Life was hard for most families, but Jimmy's family managed to get by. They didn't have electricity or indoor plumbing in their home until Jimmy was 14 years old. Even though they didn't have much, Jimmy found ways to help. When he was just 5 years old, he started selling boiled peanuts to make some extra money. Every Saturday, he'd pick peanuts from the farm, boil them, and carry them in baskets to town. He sold them for a nickel a bag, sometimes making as much as $5 in one day. This early job taught him how to work hard and think about business. Even during the Depression, Jimmy's family had enough food and just enough money, which taught him the value of being resourceful. Jimmy's father, Earl, was a strict man and a hard worker. He bought a peanut farm in 1928, and it became the family's main source of income. Earl also ran a store and a peanut warehouse. The store was next to their home and sold everything people in the community needed, like food, clothes, and tools. Jimmy helped out in the store and on the farm, learning about business from a young age. Earl didn't praise Jimmy much, but he taught him to work hard and do things the right way. Jimmy's mother, Lillian, was different. She was kind and caring. As a nurse, she helped everyone, even African Americans, at a time when segregation kept people apart. Jimmy grew up seeing his parents' very different ways of living and working, which shaped his character. Growing up in the South, Jimmy saw racial segregation everywhere. On his family's farm, he worked side by side with African Americans and became friends with them. But he started noticing how unfair things were. One time, when he was 14, he and his African American friends were walking across a field. They came to a gate, and his friends stepped aside to let him go first. This made Jimmy realize how deep racial inequality was, even among people who were friends. It stayed with him for the rest of his life. Jimmy's mother, Lillian, quietly stood against segregation. She helped African American women with health care, even though it wasn't allowed. This showed Jimmy how important it was to stand up for what's right. Later, when Jimmy came back to Plains after his naval service, he refused to join a segregationist group called the White Citizens Council. His neighbors pressured him to join and even offered to pay for him. Jimmy refused, saying he'd rather throw their money away than join. This decision led to people boycotting his family's businesses, but Jimmy stood firm. Jimmy Carter's path to the U.S. Naval Academy wasn't easy. When he first applied, he was rejected. Instead of giving up, he went to Georgia Southwestern College for a year, then joined Georgia Tech in a Naval Reserve program. After working hard, he finally got into the academy in 1943. It was a fast-paced program because of the war, but Carter did well. He graduated on June 5, 1946, ranked 60th out of 821 students. He stood out in seamanship and navigation, scoring the highest in his class. This showed how skilled he was, even early on. His classmates admired him and voted him most likely to become an admiral. Just a month after graduating, on July 7, 1946, he married Rosalyn Smith. They moved to Norfolk, Virginia, where Carter began his first assignment as a young naval officer. In 1948, Carter decided to join the submarine service. He went through a tough 6-month training program and was sent to the USS Pomfret at the end of the year. Carter quickly qualified as a submariner, which normally took much longer. He faced real danger in 1951 during a mission near Korea. A huge storm hit, and the submarine lost power and started taking on water. Carter, who was in charge at the time, kept his cool and saved the crew of 80 people. This showed his leadership and quick thinking. Later, Carter was chosen by Admiral Hyman Rickover to join the new nuclear submarine program. This was a groundbreaking field, and Carter worked directly with nuclear materials to prepare for a role on the USS Seawolf, one of the first nuclear submarines. He even helped clean up a nuclear reactor in Canada after a meltdown. This dangerous work made a big impression on him and shaped how he thought about nuclear power later in life. In 1953, Carter's life changed completely. His father passed away from cancer, and Carter had to make a hard choice. He was building a successful career in the Navy, working on cutting-edge nuclear technology, but his family's peanut farm in Plains, Georgia, needed him. Leaving the Navy was difficult for Carter and his wife, Rosalyn. She later said it felt like a huge step backward, going from their exciting Navy life to the quiet, rural life in Plains. Carter also struggled, comparing it to going from the modern world back in time. When Carter returned to Plains, he took over a struggling peanut business. His first year was rough. A terrible drought hit Georgia in 1954, and Carter's farm only made $187 in profit. Things got worse in 1955 when a frost destroyed the crops, forcing him to replant everything and sink further into debt. But Carter and Rosalyn didn't give up. Carter studied farming techniques to improve their yields, and Rosalyn learned accounting to manage the business. Slowly, things turned around. Carter introduced modern methods like irrigation and crop rotation, which helped his farm grow. By 1959, the family business was processing 2.5 million pounds of peanuts each year, a huge improvement from when they started. Carter didn't just fix his own farm, he helped others too. In 1965, he started an organization to support peanut farmers in Georgia. This group helped standardize prices and improve the peanut industry across the state. Jimmy Carter's start in politics wasn't easy. In 1962, he ran for the Georgia State Senate. At first, he lost the Democratic primary to Homer Moore by 139 votes. But Carter didn't give up. He believed something was wrong with the results. After investigating, it turned out he was right. In Quitman County, 420 votes were illegally cast. These included votes from people who were dead, prisoners, and others who no longer lived there. On his 38th birthday, a judge ordered a new election. This time, Carter won by 831 votes, getting 58% of the total. It was a big moment that showed his determination. As a state senator from 1963 to 1967, Carter focused on education and fairness. He worked hard to improve Georgia's weak school system. He wanted schools in Sumter County to combine resources to give students better opportunities. Many white voters were against this because they feared it would lead to desegregation. Carter also fought against the unfair county unit voting system. This system gave rural areas too much power and reduced the influence of urban voters, including African Americans. The Supreme Court later ruled it unconstitutional. Carter's actions made him stand out as someone who cared about equality, even when it wasn't popular. In 1966, Carter decided to run for governor, but things didn't go well. He finished third in the Democratic primary, getting only 20.9% of the vote. Ellis Arnold, a liberal former governor, and Lester Maddox, a strong segregationist, got more support. Maddox's win was a harsh reminder of how deep Georgia's racial divide was. Carter's attempt to appeal to both liberals and conservatives didn't work. He didn't win over segregationists because he supported civil rights, and liberals didn't trust him because of his rural background. The loss was tough for Carter, but it made him think deeply about his approach to politics. Over the next 4 years, he reevaluated his beliefs and became a born-again Christian. This personal change would later shape his political image. When Carter ran for governor again in 1970, his strategy shocked many people. To avoid another loss, he decided to appeal to conservative white voters, including segregationists. He even sought the support of Lester Maddox, someone he had once strongly opposed. Carter's campaign materials tried to stir up racial fears, like showing his opponent, Carl Sanders, with black basketball players. He used phrases like law and order and criticized welfare spending, words that were seen as appealing to white voters anxious about racial integration. This was a big shift from Carter's earlier progressive stance, and it upset many of his supporters. Even Georgia's leading newspaper, the Atlanta Constitution, refused to back him, calling him ignorant and racist. Despite this, Carter won the election. What happened next surprised everyone. During his inaugural speech, Carter said, "The time for racial discrimination is over." He promised equal opportunities for all Georgians, regardless of race. This was a bold move for a Southern governor at the time. Carter quickly started making changes. He hired 40% more African Americans in state government and hung a portrait of Martin Luther King Jr. in the state capitol, something no other Southern governor had done before. He reorganized the state government, cutting over 300 agencies down to 22 to make them more efficient and fair. He also introduced a new budgeting system that required departments to explain how they spent money. Carter's work in education was also groundbreaking. He pushed for equal funding for schools in rich and poor areas and expanded vocational education. He even started a statewide kindergarten program, making Georgia one of the first Southern states to offer early education for all children. By the time Carter's term ended, people saw him as a progressive leader who had changed Georgia. This reputation helped him later when he ran for president, presenting himself as a new kind of Southern politician who could bring fairness and unity to the country. Jimmy Carter announced he was running for president on December 12, 1974. He was not well known at the time, just a one-term governor from Georgia. Most Americans had never heard of him. In fact, a newspaper in Atlanta even joked with the headline, "Jimmy Who?" But Carter had a clear message. The country was still upset about the Watergate scandal, and trust in the government was at an all-time low. Carter promised honesty, fairness, and a return to strong values. He said the U.S. was lost and needed a leader to guide it back. People didn't expect much from him at first, but this was the start of a journey that would change American politics. Carter decided to run because Georgia's rules wouldn't let him serve as governor again. He had nothing to lose and big ambitions. At first, people didn't take him seriously. He didn't have the fame or experience of other politicians. But Carter's team knew that people were tired of typical Washington politicians. They presented him as an outsider, someone who wasn't part of the broken system. This idea connected with voters who wanted something new. Carter planned his campaign carefully. He decided to compete in every single primary across the country. His strategy was simple: meet as many people as possible and win their trust. At the start, Carter was up against 16 other Democrats, most of them far more famous. He worked harder than anyone else, traveling thousands of miles and giving hundreds of speeches. He focused on Iowa and New Hampshire because they were the first primaries. His goal was to win early and make people notice him. In January 1976, Carter won the Iowa caucuses, and suddenly people started paying attention. His win in Iowa helped him stand out from the crowd. It also made Iowa a key state in future elections. The media began to follow Carter after his early wins. At first, they ignored him, but now he was on the covers of magazines like Time and Newsweek. They called him a fresh face who could fix the government. Carter also knew how to appeal to different types of voters. In the South, he attracted moderate Democrats who didn't like extreme views. In the North, he connected with rural and religious voters who liked his simple, honest style. By June 1976, Carter had enough support to win the Democratic nomination. But things didn't always go smoothly. Right before the election, Carter gave an interview to Playboy magazine that shocked many people. He admitted that he had looked on women with lust and said he had committed adultery in his heart. He also spoke openly about strong language, including curse words like fuck. Some people thought this was inappropriate for someone running for president. Others saw it as a refreshing kind of honesty. Carter explained that he wasn't perfect, but he believed in admitting his flaws. For some voters, this made him seem more real. For others, it was a reason to doubt him. Despite the controversy, Carter stayed focused. On November 2, 1976, he narrowly defeated President Gerald Ford. The race was very close. Carter won 297 electoral votes, while Ford got 240. The popular vote was also tight, with Carter getting 50.1% and Ford getting 48%. Several things helped Carter win. Many people were still upset about Watergate, and Ford's decision to pardon Nixon didn't sit well with voters. The economy was also struggling, with high unemployment and inflation, which hurt Ford's chances. The debates between Carter and Ford were important too. In one debate, Ford made a big mistake. He said there was no Soviet domination in Eastern Europe, which made him look out of touch with the Cold War. This hurt him with undecided voters. Carter, on the other hand, came across as someone who could bring change and fix the problems in government. When Carter won, it showed that Americans were ready for something different. But the challenges ahead were big. The country was divided, the economy was weak, and people had high hopes for his leadership. Carter's victory was the start of a tough but historic journey. America had just gone through the Watergate scandal, and people wanted trust and honesty in their leaders again. Carter wanted to show he was different from past presidents. On his first day, he walked down Pennsylvania Avenue instead of riding in a limousine. This showed he wanted to stay connected to the people. He sold the presidential yacht, stopped serving alcohol at White House events, and signed a law in 1978 that made government officials share details about their finances. Carter even carried his own luggage when he traveled and sent his daughter, Amy, to a public school. No president had done that since 1906. These small actions made him seem humble and relatable. But sometimes, his honesty worked against him. In an interview with Playboy magazine, he admitted he had lusted in his heart. Many people found this shocking and thought it hurt his image. Carter faced big problems with the economy. Prices were rising fast, unemployment was high, and there was an energy crisis. When he became president, inflation was already at 6.8%. By the time he left, it had risen to 12.5%, even hitting 14.8% in 1980. The energy crisis that started in 1973 got worse. Carter called it the moral equivalent of war in a speech and made a plan to save fuel and increase coal production. But things didn't improve. In 1979, gas shortages caused long lines at gas stations, and sometimes fights broke out. Carter even suggested rationing gas, but Congress didn't agree. The economy also struggled with stagflation, which is when prices go up while the economy stays slow. Unemployment went down for a while, but then rose again to 7.5% by the end of his term. People were frustrated because the economy felt stuck. Even though he struggled with the economy, Carter had big successes in foreign policy. One of his greatest achievements was the Camp David Accords in 1978. Carter worked hard to bring peace between Egypt and Israel. For 13 days, he helped Egyptian President Anwar Sadat and Israeli Prime Minister Menachem Begin negotiate. At one point, they stopped talking, and Carter had to go back and forth between them to keep the talks alive. He even wrote personal letters to convince them not to give up. In the end, they signed a peace treaty that ended 31 years of fighting. Israel agreed to leave the Sinai Peninsula, and Egypt became the first Arab country to make peace with Israel. This peace has lasted for decades. Carter also signed the Panama Canal Treaties in 1977. These treaties gave control of the Panama Canal back to Panama by the year 2000. It ended years of tension between the U.S. and Latin America. Many Americans didn't like the idea, though. They thought Carter was giving away something important. Carter had to work hard to convince senators to approve the treaties, and they passed by just one vote. Carter's presidency was deeply affected by the Iran hostage crisis. On November 4, 1979, Iranian revolutionaries took over the U.S. Embassy in Tehran and held 52 Americans hostage. This lasted for 444 days. Every day, Americans saw the news about the hostages, and it made Carter look weak. He tried to solve it peacefully at first, but nothing worked. In April 1980, he ordered a rescue mission. It failed when a sandstorm caused a crash in the desert, killing 8 American soldiers. This failure hurt Carter even more. By the time he ran for re-election in 1980, his approval ratings were very low. His opponent, Ronald Reagan, used the crisis to make Carter look ineffective. The hostages were finally released on January 20, 1981, just minutes after Reagan became president. Some people thought Reagan's team made a secret deal with Iran to delay the release, but this was never proven. The crisis ended diplomatic ties between the U.S. and Iran, and the two countries remained divided. It also made Americans more aware of the growing influence of Islamic fundamentalism. This crisis became one of the biggest challenges of Carter's presidency and shaped how people remember him. In 2002, Jimmy Carter won the Nobel Peace Prize, more than 20 years after he stopped being president. This surprised many people because it's rare for a former leader to get such an award so long after leaving office. The prize honored Carter for working tirelessly to solve conflicts, protect human rights, and fight poverty worldwide. But what made it even more surprising was that the Nobel Committee used the award to criticize the sitting U.S. President, George W. Bush. They were unhappy with Bush's plans to invade Iraq, and this was the first time the prize had been used to send such a strong political message. Carter's work through the Carter Center was why he received the award. The center, which he started in 1982, had done incredible things by then. It had monitored elections in different countries, helped stop wars, and fought diseases like guinea worm disease. When Carter began this fight in 1986, there were 3.5 million cases a year. By 2002, there were fewer than 50,000. Carter even traveled to dangerous places, like Sudan, to negotiate peace so health workers could treat people safely. He donated the prize money, about $1 million, to the Carter Center. In his speech, Carter said that war might sometimes be necessary, but it is always evil. His words were especially powerful as the world was on the brink of another war in Iraq. Carter's talents didn't stop there. After leaving the presidency, he also won Grammy Awards for narrating audiobooks. His first nomination was in 1997, but he won his first Grammy in 2007 for Our Endangered Values. He kept winning even into his 90s, with his second Grammy in 2016 for A Full Life, and his third in 2019 for Faith, A Journey for All. This made him one of the oldest Grammy winners ever. Carter's ability to tell stories in a simple, moving way impressed listeners, even when competing against famous names like Patti Smith and Tiffany Haddish. In 2025, just before his 100th birthday, he was nominated again for Last Sunday in Plains. He didn't win, but being nominated at 100 years old was still amazing. In 1999, Carter and his wife Rosalyn received the Presidential Medal of Freedom from President Bill Clinton. This is the highest honor a civilian can get in the U.S., and it's very rare for former presidents to receive it. The award recognized not just Carter's time in office, but also the incredible work he and Rosalyn did afterward. They helped build homes for Habitat for Humanity, monitored elections, and fought diseases like guinea worm. By then, their efforts had reduced cases by 97%, showing how much they had achieved. Clinton said that future historians would struggle to list all the good the Carters had done because it was so vast. Carter's long life is also remarkable. On October 1, 2024, he became the first U.S. president to turn 100. Many people thought he wouldn't make it because he entered hospice care in early 2023. But he surprised everyone and lived 19 more months. Carter had faced many health challenges, including cancer that spread to his brain and liver in 2015. Doctors didn't think he would survive, but he recovered thanks to new treatments. Even after injuries like falling and breaking his pelvis, he kept active, teaching Sunday school and building homes. For his 100th birthday, his hometown celebrated with events like a military flyover and a concert that raised over $1 million for the Carter Center. Carter even said shortly before his birthday that he wanted to vote in the next election, showing he stayed involved in politics until the very end. Jimmy Carter's love story with Rosalyn Smith is one of a kind. It started in 1945 when Jimmy was a 20-year-old Naval Academy student and Rosalyn was just 17. Their first date was at the movies, and Jimmy instantly knew she was the one. He proposed with a compact engraved with ILYTG, meaning, "I love you the goodest," a sweet family saying. They got married on July 7, 1946, and their marriage lasted an amazing 77 years. It became the longest marriage in presidential history. Rosalyn wasn't just his wife. She was his closest advisor and partner. She supported him through his naval career, political campaigns, presidency, and years of humanitarian work. She even attended cabinet meetings and strongly pushed for mental health reforms. Their bond stayed strong until the very end. When Jimmy entered hospice care at 98 in February 2023, Rosalyn, then 95, stayed by his side. They made their last public appearance in September 2023 at the Plains Peanut Festival. Rosalyn passed away on November 19, 2023, at the age of 96, with Jimmy right next to her. After her passing, Jimmy said, "Rosalyn was my equal partner in everything I ever accomplished. she gave me wise guidance and encouragement when I needed it. As long as Rosalyn was in the world, I always knew somebody loved and supported me. Together, they raised 4 children while juggling public service and humanitarian work. Their first son, Jack, was born in 1947, followed by Chip in 1950, Jeff in 1952, and Amy in 1967. Despite their busy lives, family always remained important to them. When Rosalyn passed, it hit Jimmy hard. Their son, Chip, shared a heartbreaking moment from her last night. Jimmy sat in his wheelchair next to Rosalyn's bed, surrounded by family. That night showed how deep their connection was. Jimmy's health started to decline after Rosalyn's death. He passed away on December 29, 2024, at the age of 100, just over a year after she died. Their love and bond lasted even through their final moments, and their closeness in life carried through to their deaths. Jimmy Carter's net worth when he passed was about $10 million. For a former U.S. president, this is surprisingly modest. Unlike others, Jimmy didn't chase wealth after leaving office. Most of his money came from writing books. He wrote 66 books on topics like politics, faith, and even children's stories. His book Blood of Abraham became a national bestseller and added to his earnings. Despite his success, Jimmy lived very simply. He stayed in the modest ranch house in Plains, Georgia, that he built in 1961. The house was valued at just $167,066. In contrast, other presidents owned grand homes, like Donald Trump's $325 million Mar-a-Lago estate. Jimmy's simple way of living was clear in other ways too. He was known to shop at Dollar General and even attended the store's opening in Plains in 2004. His life stood as an example of humility and frugality. How Jimmy's estate will be divided is still unclear, but his life philosophy gives us some clues. His 4 children are likely to inherit much of it, but Jimmy's dedication to service suggests that a large part of his estate will support charitable causes, especially the Carter Center. The family has already asked for donations to the center instead of flowers. His home in Plains, where he chose to be buried alongside Rosalyn, may become a historical site. Jimmy also leaves behind 11 grandchildren and 14 great-grandchildren, and he may have set up funds to support them. The royalties from his many books will continue to bring in income for either his family or the causes he cared about. After Jimmy's death, his family shared touching reflections about his life. Chip Carter said, "My father was a hero, not only to me, but to everyone who believes in peace, human rights, and unselfish love." His grandson Jason shared how Jimmy guided his life, recalling, "When I graduated from college, he and I sat down and I said, 'What would you do if you were me?' And he said, 'I would go to Africa and join the Peace Corps.' And so I did that." These words show how much Jimmy inspired his family. His marriage to Rosalyn was another source of pride for them. After their deaths, one family member said, "We will miss them both dearly, but take solace knowing they are reunited once again and will remain forever in our hearts." Jimmy's humility and love for others remained strong throughout his life. He stayed connected to his community in Plains, teaching Sunday school into his 90s and helping those in need. His grandson Josh spoke about his dedication, saying, "My grandfather spent the entire time I've known him helping those in need. He built houses for people that needed homes. He eliminated diseases. He waged peace." Jimmy and Rosalyn Carter left behind a legacy of love, service, and humanity that will be remembered forever.